elected to the general election in November 2010, November 2014, and 2018. Nancy is the first Latina member of the council. She's the current president of the county council, having served before as president in 2013, and council vice president in 2012 and 2018. She also chairs the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee and is a member of the Education and Culture Committee. In October 2011, President Barack Obama appointed Nancy as a member of the President's Commission on Educational Excellence for Hispanics. Prior to joining the council, Nancy was a member of the Montgomery County Board of Education. Before entering public office, Nancy co-founded a nonprofit, community-based organization with a mission to assist the economic and educational development of Latino and other immigrant communities. Nancy holds a bachelor's degree in psychology at the University of Missouri, Columbia. She was born in Caracas, Venezuela, and has lived in the county for more than 2 decades with her husband, Reginald, and her 2 daughters. Following Ms. Navarro's presentation, we will accept a few questions from the audience. Please go to the microphones on each side of the aisles to ask your question. In addition, we'll have people that will take your questions if you're in the center. Thank you.
Well, good morning. So as you heard, my name is Nancy Navarro, and I am the president of the Montgomery County Council. So I do bring greetings from my colleagues. We're all in council session this morning, but when I was invited to come over and provide some remarks by Ms. Bland and of course Dr. Pollard, I knew I had to make a little parentheses and run over here and share with you some thoughts. So I do appreciate the opportunity. Let me just start by saying that it is my belief that addressing issues of racial equity and social justice are truly a must if we are to ensure the continued socioeconomic vitality of our county. This is an issue that is very personal for me. We hear time and time again that this is a county that embraces diversity, and we celebrate this quite often. And nonetheless, every time you look at data, you continue to see reflected all these particular disparities, and those types of disparities continue to persist, right? So we look at issues of course, access to education and education achievement. We look at employment opportunities, we look at health, we look at housing, transportation, et cetera, et cetera. And inevitably, every time you do a deep analysis, you realize that there are disparities and inequities that continue to persist. And this is truth across, race, ethnicity, income levels, gender, English language proficiency, et cetera. And so as I alluded to it earlier, for me this has been an issue of great interest for a very long time. I happened to come to the United States when I was 10 years old with my parents and my younger siblings, so my father could pursue some graduate work at the University of Missouri, Rolla. Very small town in the Midwest. And at that time, for me, this was kind of like a magical journey because I was so intrigued by this language that these children were, speaking that sounded to me like this wishy-washy, yes, wish-wash-wash type thing. And so I would always emulate that. And when my father made this proposal to the family and my mom thought he had lost his mind because we had to sell our home and everything, I jumped at that opportunity, readily and willing to do this. And so we came to Rolla, Missouri, and at that time they didn't have ESOL because they had never had any student at the Benton Elementary School that didn't speak English. So I was placed in speech therapy. And that lasted a little while, but since I was so obsessed with learning English, I really immersed myself completely. So, I would read the Highlights magazine up and down. I would watch the Soul Train religiously every Saturday. I would practice the moves while I tried to learn the lyrics to the songs. I did everything in my power to the point that in 6 months I went by it, and then I became a champion for the spelling bee for Benton Elementary School, which was really, truly cool. And so that really began this real sort of, love for exploring other cultures and other ways of being. And it also began to put into focus some interesting issues that were obviously happening in the United States in 1975, because we were here from 1975 to 1977. But as a kid, of course, for me, it was not really front and center. And so issues of, civil rights struggles and fight for civil rights, et cetera, did kind of escape me a bit, because specifically my family in Venezuela, and there's a meme that went around that I find so cute. It's a Puerto Rican family, and you literally have like a blonde, blue-eyed cousin, a black cousin, a curly-haired, olive-skinned cousin. It says these are all members of my family, although none of us look alike. That really is a reflection of my own family, where my grandmother is black, my grandfather was white from Spain, my mother is half, Native American and half Spanish, and so all of that mixing has really resulted in a Venezuela, the one that I knew, that was extraordinarily diverse, and so issues of disparities were really attached to class, but not so much to what you look like, because it was kind of hard to put you in a box. So I share that because when I came back as a student in 1983, when my father and mom gave me permission to come to the University of Missouri Columbia, even though I wanted to go to California or New York, where I had heard Studio 54 may reopen, I said, fine, I'll go to Columbia, Missouri, but maybe I'll transfer later on. But I ended up really liking it there, because there were so many students from so many parts of the world that I had this extraordinary experience of literally learning so much from other cultures, as we would host, parties in our townhome, and we had this map of the world, and people were supposed to put a little dot, and it was just peppered. It was really cool. But then I started really kind of focusing on a lot of other issues, mainly things like divestment from South Africa during the time of apartheid, which was my very first political experience. And with students, we actually built a shanty town in front of the green area of the administration. But because I was on a student visa, I tried to be kind of in the background, so I would do the copying and things like that. It just started to open up my mind to a very different socio-political world. And then destiny is really interesting, because I ended up graduating, and then I ended up having an opportunity to work in my field, and my mom and my dad were in the process of getting a divorce, and so my mom would say, hold off, and I kept saying, okay, well, I'm gonna work in a couple more years, but my plan was never really to stay in the United States. It was truly to gain some experience and then go back to Venezuela to provide some of those contributions that I had learned here, but it didn't happen that way, and I came to the DC region, an area that I had visited in the past, and I literally said, if I were to ever stay in the United States and raise a family, in the weird chance that that might happen, it would have to be the DC region, because of its extraordinary diversity, right? After living in Missouri for so long, I would come here to visit, and it was just like, wow, this is amazing, this is awesome, right? I could go to Adams Morgan and buy salsa cassettes. I could go to the African Museum of Art in the Smithsonian. It was just incredible that you had all these opportunities. So, sometimes you put things in the universe, and I came to the DC region to try to get a little bit more work experience before going back to Venezuela. I met my husband, who's Haitian American, and we decided to settle here in the DC region, obviously. When we were gonna have our first child, we decided to move to Montgomery County, as many people do. So then I had this task of raising this, Haitian, Venezuelan, American, Afro-Latina, however you want to label it, because there's so many great labels. But I had that task of raising this child now in the United States, it was an incredible task, right? Because how do you do that? Like, how do I, not just me, my husband as well, of course, but how do we infuse as much confidence, as much love for exploring